Good morning. I'm Eric Kapitulik. I'm the founder and CEO of the program, and this is Coffee with Cap. The program is a team building and leadership development company. We have one mission: develop better leaders and create more cohesive teams. We believe in personal development, leadership development, and team building through shared adversity, and that we only grow as individuals and as a team when we're outside of our comfort zone. I appreciate that so many Americans have feelings of frustration, sadness, and anger. Admittedly, I appreciate, but I don't fully understand that adversity that so many are faced, and the topic on which we'll discuss today. But I do know that with any adversity comes an opportunity. Maybe not an opportunity for utopia, but I hope and I believe an opportunity to get to a better place, better families, better schools, better athletic teams, better corporations, and a better country for all Americans. This adversity, however, will only be an opportunity if we first think of it as such. But then we must do something to make it so. This morning's conversation is one of the program's attempts to do so. On average, we speak at approximately 150 words a minute. Our brains are powerful enough to consume, to make sense of approximately 450 words a minute. What do we do with that extra capacity? We multitask, and we think about our response to the person who is speaking to us. We listen to respond. This morning, I will not. Instead, I will listen to understand. I challenge all of you, the viewers this morning, and those listening later, to do the same. Listen to understand. Now, it's my great pleasure and privilege to introduce this august panel to you. In our screens, let me, as you're viewing at home, next to me, Coach Sharman Smith. Coach Smith, welcome to Coffee with Cap.
Thanks, Eric.
Coach Smith is the head coach of the University of California women's basketball team. She has been in coaching since 2007. She hails from St. Louis, Missouri. She was a star player for Stanford University from 1993 through 1997. She helped the Cardinal to 3 NCAA Final Fours and 3 Pac-10 titles. She's played in 3 different professional leagues, the ABL, the WNBA, and, Coach, please correct me if I get this wrong, the Damligen, the Swedish professional league. In 2019, prior to being hired as the head coach for Cal, Coach Smith filled the role of assistant coach with the New York Liberty. Coach Smith, welcome to Coffee with Cap.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
Next, Mikado Hinson. Mikado is the director of player development and chaplain for the Texas A&M University football team, where he has served for 6 years. Mikado has also served at the University of Houston, where he spent 14 years as the team chaplain and character development coach for the Cougar football team. Mikado was the team chaplain for the Houston Rockets from 2000 to 2008 and served on the FCA National Chaplains Task Force from 2010 to 2003. He became a licensed and ordained minister in 2005. Mikado is married Deshandra Hinson, and the couple have 3 children, 2 daughters, Maya and Kendall, and a son, MJ. Mikado and I, we've known each other for a long time. Mikado, I would say this for our listeners. If they run into, or if any panelists run into somebody that says, God, Eric Capitula, I don't know about that guy. I don't really like him. Mikado, the truth is, I can kind of understand it. My teammates and I at the program, what we've always said about Mikado Hinson is, if you're ever in a conversation with somebody and they say, Mikado, I don't know about that guy is a bad person. Mikado, welcome to Coffee with Cap.
Honored to be among you, Cap.
Travis Daigle. Travis is a writer and a speaker and believes that life is all about problem solving. As a child, he struggled with abuse, obesity, and bullying. As a teenager, Travis weighed as much as 305 pounds and endured a 7-year trial and error weight loss process that would ultimately see him lose 100 pounds of it. He took the lessons learned during that time to go forward and earn an electrical engineering degree with honors at the University of Houston in 2005. Travis is also a former U.S. Army Special Forces medic and combat veteran. He served with distinction from 2007 to 2012 in Afghanistan. We will talk more about this at the end of our conversation this morning, but I would suggest to all of the listeners this morning, all the viewers this morning and listeners after, to go to TED and check out his TED Talk on Adapt and Overcome. Travis admittedly is a teammate of ours at the program. And like all teammates, the best thing I can say about Travis is he makes me better. Travis, welcome to Coffee with Cap.
Thank you.
Coach Green. Coach Green is the Harvard University women's tennis coach. She has been there for 13 years and hails from Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. She's a 1998 NCAA champion as a student athlete with the University of Florida. In 2009, she became the first African-American coach to win an Ivy League title at Harvard University, and she's the second most winningest coach at Harvard women's tennis. Coach Green, is it true as well? In my research, I also found out that your mother, Tina Sloan Green, is a member of the National Lacrosse Hall of Fame for her work at Temple University. Did I find that out correctly?
That's correct. That's correct.
Amazing. And for the listeners, many of you, or I'm sorry, for the viewers, many of you who know me or know the program, I get told oftentimes, man, Cap, you're one intense dude. Intensity is on a relative basis, and compared to Coach Green, I'm nowhere near as intense as Coach Green is. Every day, every interaction that we have, whether it's when I pick up the phone or we see each other on campus, I know I had better bring my A game. Coach Green is also one of the mentally and emotionally toughest coaches and people I have ever been around. And Coach, I'm so glad you were able to join us this morning on Coffee with Cap. Thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me, Cap.
Finally, Coach Grant. Coach Anthony Grant is the head coach of the Dayton University Flyer men's basketball team. He attended and played basketball at Dayton University. This past year, he led Dayton to their greatest basketball season ever. In 2020, his accomplishments include Atlantic 10 Coach of the Year, Sporting News National Coach of the Year, NABC, National Association of Basketball Coaches Coach of the Year. He's the recipient of the Henry IBA Award. He's the AP National Coach of the Year, and he was also the recipient of the Naismith College Coach of the Year. That's in 2020. With that said, that's what Coach Grant does. It's not who he is. I've had the pleasure of knowing Coach Grant, and I dare say calling him now a friend of mine over the past decade. Every interaction I have with him makes me better as a human being, and it's a privilege to call him my friend. Coach Grant is married to Christina, whom I've had the good fortune enough to meet, have dinner with. She's welcomed me into their home, and together they have 4 children, Anthony Jr., Makai, Jada, and Preston. Coach Grant, thank you so much for joining us.
Pleasure, Cap. Always good to see you.
Thank you, Coach. Likewise. Finally, I know he's having a little bit of technical difficulties this morning, but I'm hoping that he will join us here shortly as Coach Randy Shannon, who's the defensive coordinator and linebacker coach at the University of Central Florida. In 2001, Coach Shannon won the Frank Broyles Award, which is presented annually to the nation's best assistant coach, and has had 25 defensive players drafted into the NFL, including 12 first-round picks during that span. He played professionally. He attended the University of Miami, where he played linebacker and was an All-American. Went on to play professional football for the Dallas Cowboys prior to getting into coaching. My family and I, every week since the coronavirus and the quarantine has occurred, we've made it a habit to talk about and for us to share with each other one thing that has occurred in the past week that the coronavirus and the quarantine has done positively for us as an individual. Last week, my one thing was my relationship with Coach Shannon. During this quarantine, he and I have made a good relationship into a great one, and it's been to my benefit. Coach Shannon, welcome to Coffee with Cap. Now, I'd like...
I have a little problems already. I think I got it.
Coach Shannon, that's all right.
Can you guys hear me a little bit?
We can hear you, Coach. We're good. Yes. Yep.
All right, I'm back now. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you, Coach. It's good. I just read your bio. I
can't hear you guys, so you got to give me a minute again.
Okay, I'm gonna have Travis. I'll take Coach off. I'll add Travis to the conversation. We're gonna have to do that throughout the day today. Anyway, thank you all for joining me here this morning to talk about such a vital problem as racism and just a conversation on race in America. I can't thank you enough. Coach Grant,
Yes.
I'd like to start with you. Coach Grant, I believe that all of us are some of our experiences, and those experiences create certain biases within us that drive what we believe to be true for all of us. Those biases that we all possess are formed from a host of different factors and from a very young age. In an effort for all of us to help ensure that we do not inadvertently help create these biases in our own children as it pertains to race. I'd love to hear your thoughts, because I want and I need to know, what is the conversation, or probably more accurately, what are the conversations that my wife and I should have with our own children?
Yeah. Well, Cap, it's a broad question, and obviously you and I know each other, and I know I don't know your children personally, and I haven't met your wife, but I do know you have young kids, ages 8 and 3. Is that correct?
Right, correct.
So obviously, in everybody's home, you're dealing with what our country's going through with the pandemic, and everybody being at home probably more often than we're used to. And with what's happened with George Floyd and Ahmaud Arbery and Breonna Taylor over the last 2 weeks has been in the forefront of the media. So it's on TV. So if your kids are seeing that, I think at that age, it's the variety of things that they could be experiencing. And I don't know, you know, the schools that your kids attend, you know, if it's a diverse population that they're in, or if it's more people that look like them and in the neighborhoods you live. So I would say to be able to tell your kids, you know, the images that they see on TV or what sometimes is portrayed on TV is not necessarily what's true in society. I would say giving your kids the opportunity to interact with people different than them, whether it be in school, whether it be in any activities that they participate in today's day and age. Maybe it's through what you choose to have them watch on TV, and educate them that you know, in this world that we live in, there's people that may have a different skin tone than them, or come from a different background than them. But just the fact that, you know, we're all created equal, and we live in a country that has had a history of maybe not treating all people that way. And as your children, you want them to understand people from all races and be able to have relationships, because like in most things, we fear what we don't know. We kind of we develop stereotypes about things that we don't know, and once we are able to educate ourselves, and especially educate our children in terms of those relationships. So I would say, whether it's the movies that your kids watch, or the toys that they play with, or the things that they read, being able to give them positive images about what's going on, you know, because you know, what's happened over decades in our country, you know, certainly impacts, depending on your perspective and how you were raised, or in the environment you were raised in. It may impact you differently, and it may influence how you view a certain demographic. So I would say just being able to give your kids a true experience in terms of dealing with people that may be different than them.
Coach Grant, a few things. You mentioned the ages of my children, and it's just my wife and I's belief. It's the program's belief that, and I don't want to put words into any panelist's mouth here. I'm here to, as I said in my insertion, listen to understand. I just want to be able to ask questions. But my wife and I, we believe that the more things that we can discuss with our children at a younger age, race being one of them, the drug use, eating disorders, right? Sexual orientation, all of these things, the sooner that we can have those conversations, it doesn't necessarily guarantee great outcomes when they're teenagers or older, but not doing it, not doing it ensures our failure. Is there a difference based on if the viewers and listeners later have young children versus teenage children? Is there a different conversation there, or just more of them, or different? Is there a difference there?
Well, you know, just listening to you, Cap, and again, like, as you said, I'm trying to listen to understand. So I think it all depends on, you know, really how you live in your household. You know, if you're having those type of conversations regarding sexual orientation and obesity and drug use and things with your kids when they're 4, 5, 6, 7 years old, not everybody may be doing that, you know, and you know, a lot of what we want to do as parents, my youngest is 14 and my oldest is 24 now. A lot of what we try to do is we try to protect our kids. We try to make sure we give our kids, they want to, where they feel safe, where they're not worried about, you know, is something going to happen to me when I leave my house tomorrow. You want to protect them and you want to have them feel safe. So at least I can speak for me. I didn't necessarily have those conversations regarding race or anything else with my kids when they were the age of your kids. You know, I was aware of it. My wife was aware of it. We tried to create an environment for them that they were safe, where they were in a diverse environment as much as possible, where they could kind of learn. And as things come up, you kind of address, hey, how do you feel about this? you know, how did this make you feel? Hey, tell me about your day. How was, you know, did you have fun playing with Johnny, or did you, you know, how was the group here? So you kind of communicate to your kids and kind of try to learn their experiences. So I do think if you're dealing with younger kids, just as me personally, obviously everybody here is different.
Yeah.
I'm having a different conversation with my 15-year-old now. My youngest just turned 15 last week, and my 18-year-old daughter and my 20-year-old son and my 24-year-old. They're at an age where maybe I'm showing them a little bit more to educate them about, hey, here's why some of this stuff is going on. Okay, just from a historical standpoint, so you understand. In your lifetime, you may have seen this over the last 4 or 5 years, and your thought was, yeah, I know what happened back in the 60s and 70s, but that's not the world we live in. It's completely different now. And in some ways, we've made progress, and in some ways, we still have a long way to go. So as it comes to the topic of race, I think it's depending on the age, I do think they can understand a little bit better because their experiences are different. You and I could sit here and watch something on TV, and my lens, being 54 years old, is completely different than the lens of my 15-year-old with the life experiences they've had. So I've got to be able to try to get an idea of where they are and how are they interpreting this? Not necessarily how am I interpreting this? How could they interpret? We could be looking at the same thing, and he could see something completely different than what I'm seeing. You know, so I have to be able to ask questions in terms of how are you understanding and interpreting this? All right. And then based on that, I have to try to educate.
Coach,
Hey, Eric, can I,
please.
sorry,
Coach
Pat, can
Smith.
I, thanks. You know, I agree with what Coach said there. And I also think there's one major thing that, you know, white families, white parents can be discussing with their kids, and that is their privilege and acknowledging their privilege. I think that is a major source of the problem in this country, is that you know, white people fail to understand how they get to navigate through this country and through their life every day in a different way that Black people do. And so when we say, you know, things are supposed to be equal in this country, they're not. And white people need to understand that they're not. And talking to your kids about how, yeah, you may be able to play in the park with toy water guns and such, but a young Black boy can't do that because they get shot dead. Right? So these are the things that white people and white children in particular need to understand.
Yeah.
So that when they get to college and they're at their frat parties and they're hanging out and there's, you know, the Black kids there, that they understand it's a totally different experience and they know how to empathize, and they know that they're navigating through society with a different lens and they get to walk freely. We do not. It was said by someone like, white people go through life on offense and we have to go through life on defense. What do I say? I don't want to, you know, scare anyone. Can I wear my hoodie? Can I dress this way? What do I have to do? White people never have to think about those things. And that's the big difference that people need to understand.
Coach Smith, what I'd ask all the panelists is if you could mute your microphone until you're, if you want to speak, then unmute it. I should have gone over that. We were only on the phone for 45 minutes before this conversation, and I could have used some of that 45 minutes. Instead, I'm going to waste our time doing it now. So this is my fault. But Coach Smith, you just said something. Two things. First of all, Coach Grant, you just said something that really struck a chord with me, which was we can see the same thing, but we have, because of the lens we're looking at, we see very different things. If I draw a 6 in the sand and you stand on one side of it and I stand on the other, you're going to say you see a 6. I say it's a 9. I think one of the things, and I'll just say again, of why I'm so grateful to have this opportunity for myself, for my family, and for our viewers and listeners is this, is that unfortunately, I feel like when it comes to conversations about race, because they are so emotionally charged, as well as I talked earlier about sexual orientation, religion, these politics, because those things are so emotionally charged. Instead, if you're standing and look at the 6 and I look at the 9, I feel like we're wasting too much energy screaming and yelling, trying to prove ourselves right, rather than listening to understand each other and coming up with just a better understanding of each other's view based on those experiences that we had, that puts you looking at a 6, me looking at a 9. And that understanding of, hey, our experiences give us a different lens. Realize we just have a different lens. And then be mature enough to have that discussion is very impactful. Coach Smith, you just said something that I had a visceral response to, like an aha moment about that white people. And again, I hate to, as I know you do, I hate to generalize an entire race, right? And an entire, just based on the color of their skin. But your thought about, hey, white people go through it on offense, go through life on offense. By and large, black people go through it on defense. What do I have to say? Can I say it? You know, because the reason why I had a visceral response to what you said is that that would be very difficult. I mean, and to call it difficult is not even come close to the true reflection of how challenging that would be to go through life that way. In preparation for today's Coffee with Cap, the amount of time, energy, emotion that I spent figuring out, hey, how do I say this? How do I frame this so that it's not taken a certain way? And that's one conversation that I had to prepare for. If I had to do that throughout my entire life, my American experience would be a lot different than what my American experience is. You're framing it that way. And just my experiences in the last 24 hours as I prepared for this conversation. That's impactful. Thank you. Coach Hinson, Mikado, let me move to you. Is there, as a parent of biracial children, are you having a different conversation than the one that I'm having, that Coach Grant just said? Are you having different conversations with your own children? Our listeners come from all walks of life, or all races, or all different sexual orientations, come from all different states, rich, poor, urban, country. Is there a difference in the conversation that you and your wife are having with your children than the conversation that I'm having with my wife and our children? And how, yeah,
I would have, Cap, well, thanks for the question. Before I even answer the question, you mentioned being biracial. My father's black, my mother's white. Today, they were celebrating 49 years of marriage. And so that really does something for me today, being married in 1971. It was a struggle. And so I just want to wish them a happy anniversary here on June 6th. The conversation that
too, by the way, I've been married for nowhere near as long as that, and I know, man, that's hard work. That's hard work, and so everybody congratulates you on the day you get married. From what I've seen, any two idiots can get married. Man, that staying married part is the challenge. So
that's right. Man, that's right.
Congratulations to your parents.
Yeah, I got some champion parents, and I'm proud and honored to call them my mom and dad. So the grace of God is really strong, for sure. They endured. But Cap, to answer your question, the conversation that my wife is, you see me, I'm a little light skinned. My wife is a dark skinned black woman. And so our children are a little darker than me, little lighter than my wife. I would like to say a beautiful bronze, a dark bronze. My daughter Maya is 22, my daughter Kendall's 19, and then MJ is 16. And so when they were young, when we were living in Houston, Texas, in Missouri City, it was really a melting pot of people. The schools that they went to were well balanced in ethnicities. We moved to College Station. It was a little bit different, right? The school that they went to, kind of like the high school I went to in Olathe, Kansas, which is why I chose to go to an HBCU. I went to Norfolk State University, and because I wanted to experience and grow deeper in my culture and who I am. And so the conversation that I have with my children, and my wife and I have had with our children, obviously when they were younger, it was more of a monologue. It was us teaching them and talking to them, and them sometimes looking and saying, okay, are we done? I'm ready to go play. As they grew older and had different life experiences, that became more of a dialogue. How are you feeling? What are you going through? And those dialogues became real. My wife and I got to dig a little deeper into our life experiences and some things that we went through, and their grandparents, our parents went through. And so we realized that when they were young, more is caught than taught, right? And so our lifestyle and the way we lived our life was very, very important, oftentimes bigger than the conversations that we were having with them, because them seeing
more is copped than taught.
right.
That's so, yeah, we model our behavior off of that which we see.
Absolutely. And so if they saw how my wife and I were loving people and living our lives, but also, like as Coach Smith said, had our defenses and our guards up, at certain times. My kids, when I walk into a speaking engagement, I'm always scanning the room to see, is there anyone who looks like me? Not that it's going to change how I speak. I'm going to be the best version of me. But that makes a difference to me. That matters to me. And I've shared that with my children, just knowing your surroundings, and are you the only one who looks like you? And if it is, the scales may become even more out of balance, depending on what the situation looks like. So
Coach Mikado, is that because of, as Coach Smith mentioned, and I reiterated, because of the offense defense type of feeling, Coach Mikado?
Yeah,
sorry.
Yeah, sure. No,
Yeah.
you call me whatever you want. I'm good. Yeah, absolutely. Because you got to become more aware of microaggressions. You got to become more aware of different implicit biases that people may have towards you. And you may get the proverbial, you speak so well, you're so articulate and things like that. And people think they're giving you a great compliment. Well, it may be a pat on the back and a punch to the gut at the same time. And so just being able to, I think for us to raise our children now, my 22-year-old living on her own, my 19-year-old graduated from high school in junior college, and my son will be a junior in high school. Their life experiences are a little bit different now, right? They are now seeing things that we've talked about, seeing things we've lived, experiencing some of the same things. I'm going to give you a quick life experience. My daughter works at a grocery store, right? And she's beautiful. This is not proud dad saying it. She is. She's beautiful. And someone said, "You sure are pretty for a color." 1000%. And if you saw her, you would say the same thing. But she was told, "You sure are pretty for a colored girl," right? That was 2000. This is 2020. This is end of 2019. Someone took their groceries off the conveyor belt and took them to another line in 2020. Right. And so she's coming home crying, why are people so mean and things? And so then there's more teaching that goes on. Right. So the conversations that we're having with our kids oftentimes come through shared experiences, right, Cap? Shared adversity, right?
Yes.
But also through educating, because in my children's schools, the high schools and secondary schools I went to, there was a snippet on Black history, and it was always the same. We heard about the same people, right? We didn't go deeper into the Tom Skinners, and we didn't go deeper into Black inventors and things like that. There are so many things that are left untouched, but we learn a lot through a lens about American history that may not particularly be true, but it's through a lens. And so we are responsible as parents to educate our children. So what does that mean? My wife and I have to continue to educate ourselves, You know, I'm reading a book called The Blood of Emmett Till right now. I'm going to read the Frederick Douglass autobiography. I mean, there are things that we have to do because the things that are being taught in our schools aren't being taught in full. And so experiences, educating, and then also when my 16-year-old son's riding his bike to his friend's house in our neighborhood, which is decently, but when he's riding his bike with his hoodie, I'm having to explain to him, you know, we're saying text us when you get there. You know, no need to stop between point A and point B. I think a lot of parents may do that, but we're having to do that with a higher level of alert with our son, because God forbid he ever gets pulled over. It's kind of like jogging through the neighborhood, right? So someone gets chased down, and then they becomes judge, jury, and executioner, like the Ahmaud Arbery case. And so here's what I liken it to, Cap, and I want to share two quick things, and then I will definitely hit mute on my mic here.
It's okay.
But it's like my cell phone, right? We operate with our cell phone, but we'll have so many apps in the background running, and it's draining our battery, but we don't see it. But it's something in the background that's always going on that is a little bit draining and causes a little bit of stress and pressures and all those things. And it's not until I address those apps and close them out. That's why we say text when you get there, because between point A and point B, that app is running in the background saying, did MJ make it safely? Did he make it safely? Did he make it safely? Okay, he made it safely. Okay. Okay, he's where he needs to be. Okay, he's with friends. What are you doing? You know, we're not helicopters by any stretch, but we want to know, because if he's the only one who looks like him in a situation, we've let him know. Look, dude, you're already going in with a strike. According to society, not in God's eyes, but in society's eyes, you're going in with a strike. Okay. And the last thing I'll share, Cap,
Mikado,
is
can I ask you a question? And by the way, two things, Mikado. Number one, boy, I hope no panelist today feels pressure to stop talking at any point, because as I said earlier, this is such a wonderful opportunity that I have as a father. My wife is upstairs watching this right now with my son, that we have to listen to understand. I don't need to talk. I want to listen. I want to listen to who I have this panel.
Yes,
so please, I don't want any panelists to feel, hey, I got to hit mute on this. Please don't feel that way. This is awesome.
I appreciate
Mikado, one of the things that you said, right? Because for those of us with our own children, I mean, it's them and then everything else in life, right? And to have all of us, when our children leave the house, we're scared for their safety. All of us are. To have an additional level of fear because of the color of your skin, which they didn't choose to have, it has to cause frustration and anger that is draining, like the apps in the background, to say the least.
And Cap, I'll say this. The reason why I say I'll mute, because I want to hear some of the amazing shared experiences on this panel here. I'm in my own thoughts and mind all the time, so I get tired of listening and talking to myself. But to go back to your point, I did not choose this skin, but I wouldn't choose it any differently all over again. I love who I am. And there was a time I used to apologize because I felt like I was too light to be black, and I felt like I was too dark to be white. And so I was kind of caught in a world of, I wasn't sure in identity, and with a Japanese name, right? So I'm continually defending myself. What are you? What are you? What are you? That gets pretty tiresome. But here's the last thing I'll say. In the society that we live, and we communicate this with our family, the best analogy that I can personally think of is I work at Texas A&M. I live in College Station, Texas, where everyone except for me today wears maroon and white. The majority color in College Station is maroon and white as far as apparel. That is majority. And you start to not notice that people are wearing maroon until someone walks up with burnt orange. And then you see them in a completely different light. And without knowing them, you start making judgment on them, right? And you start looking at them saying, oh, you got the others, you're wearing their color, da da da. And you demonize people who don't look like you, right? And so that's what I speak for myself, the African American community, feel like in a majority culture oftentimes, right? You walk in and it's like you're walking into, another analogy is you're walking into a room full of people with 2 arms and you have the 1 arm. And everyone looks at you and they're wondering, now you're different than us, right? Mm-hmm. And so I think those are things that we are continually teaching our kids is, hey, at 22, 19, 16, you're walking into a lot of situations where you may be viewed as different. Okay. And here's how we educate. So now our monologue with our children when they're younger, which happens, my wife is an amazing teacher, has become a dialogue. And now we're having healthy conversation, right? We had a family meeting the other night and we went to the march in Houston, and it was an opportunity for my kids to scream, so to speak, and my wife to scream. And it was unbelievable, the conversations that have come from that. So it is ongoing, but yes, the way we teach our kids is it may be a little bit different than how you teach your kids.
Yeah.
But teaching has to happen. Teaching has to happen until learning takes place. Okay. Yeah. I've been taught that and I believe it. We got to continue to teach until people learn. And so a lot of times teaching is and learning is very uncomfortable, and we avoid those things that are uncomfortable. Right. And so those conversations, which are tough, but when you come out of them, you may be scarred, you may be cut up, you may be bruised, but you can look back and say, I needed that. I needed to be uncomfortable. So yes,
Mikado, two things, and Coach Green, a number of our listeners are pinging me to tell me that they want to hear Coach Green, and so I'm coming to you next, Coach. But Mikado, two things that really struck a chord with me, which is, number one, teaching must occur until learning takes place. And that's why, as I said earlier, and I asked the wrong question, which was, tell me the conversation we need to have with our children. Well, it's not a conversation if learning doesn't take place in that conversation. It's conversations that we need to have until learning takes place. And that's for us, when we're talking about our children, that's even more important, as you highlighted, for us as adults, the people who are responsible for this society, is we need to keep learning from each other, gain a better understanding from each other, and we're going to have to keep doing it until learning takes place. The other point that really made an impact on me, because it's something not just about race, it's about life, which is, you mentioned you and your wife need to keep reading. We need to keep getting better. I'd second that for my wife and I, and I hope that all of our viewers and listeners feel the same way. There's no middle ground. Get better or die. There's no middle ground. There's no true thing in life is just maintaining. That's not Eric Kapitulik or the program that believes it. That's biology. We must get better. I can't control you getting better, but man, I can make the choice for me to get better. And it doesn't surprise me that you say that, Coach Mikado, knowing you for as long as I have. But man, it reinforces that belief in me. Is I got to get better. We have to get better for this. So I appreciate your remarks.
Yes, Lord. Coach
Green, a number of our viewers are asking, and when we decided to have this conversation on race today, I thought about, I truly, for the first time, Coach, thought about, man, Coach Green would add a really unique perspective here, talking about the fact that you're coaching a sport that historically is predominantly white. And by predominantly, Coach, maybe you know the exact figures. To me, if I take the Williams sisters out of the equation, by predominantly, it might be 99.9% white. I don't know what the exact things are, but I believe that might add, you've had faced racism within your sport. What I'd like to ask you, Coach, is through that, and I talked about it when I introduced you, you're the most mentally and emotionally tough one of Coach's people I've ever met. You always have a smile on your face. Win or lose, you have a smile. You share positive energy. Coach, right now, in these last 2 weeks, what brings you joy?
That's a great question there. And we've probably all gone through a whirlwind of emotions. I'm sure the coaches on this panel has been on a roller coaster the last few weeks here. But what truly gives me joy, and I would say it's probably two things. One is all of the young folks right now who are getting involved in so many different ways in this movement, in this process of speaking up. Some of them are, whether they're going to on the street, whether they're out there on the street protesting, whether they're getting in touch with their local governments, whether they're spreading information on social media. It's just so heartwarming for me. And it's actually very, very energizing on a daily basis just to wake up and you see, whether it's folks on your team who you've never heard speak this way before, not in a bad way, but you hear them talking and learning and doing their research and telling you, hey, I just read 4 books. I'm ready to read the next one on X, Y, and Z. And to me, that's a very, very positive thing. I'm not quite sure how things will be when the spotlight is off, when the cameras stop rolling. But I am very hopeful. I have a call with our team today. We've had a few conversations with our team, like I said, and it's just so heartwarming. So for me, that's one aspect of what's going on right now that brings me joy. The other thing that's kept me going and kept me focused, and I don't want to say distractions. I've always been involved with foundations, but I'm involved with one particular foundation as a board member called the Black Women in Sport Foundation. And as a Black woman, as a Black female, we are one of the most marginalized groups right out there. Obviously, anyone can get killed, right? As you can see, as everyone has been able to see with the national media and national attention. But that's a group that's near and dear to my heart. We've been able to increase the number and involvement of Black women in sport in all aspects. It's really making a difference with our youth. So those are two things on a daily basis, like actual programs that we can put in place to help one another. That's what brings me joy and keeps me energized on a daily basis. And of course, the young folks, like I said, getting involved. And I'm so proud of the work that our young population are doing right now. And I think they are really leading this country. I think we're kind of, I don't want to say we're behind them, but we kind of are moving behind them in a sense. And again, I'm hopeful that when the cameras stop rolling, this work will still be getting done.
Coach Green, it's so funny because as you're aware from our long relationship that we've had and the long relationship that you've had with the program and a number of panelists have had with the program, one of our key tenets at the program is you'll never hear myself or any member of the program team ever use the term kids these days. All old people like me use it. Oh, kids these days this, kids these days that. For us, as we've always said, we love the kids these days. It's their parents we can't stand. So that's funny you said it about, and that was having nothing to do with a conversation on race. That was on being great teammates and great team leaders and on their athletic teams and their corporations. So it's Great to hear that. Coach, let me come back to you and ask a question about what would be advice you would tell coaches, white coaches who coach predominantly white sports, that if we think of, let me use the sport that I played, men's lacrosse, okay, where do we see more African Americans and other people of color playing those sports now than we did 25 years ago when I was in college and played, right? Yes, we do. It's still, they're still in a minority of that sport. But there are more and more people of color playing sports that have been historically predominantly white. What would you tell a coach of a predominantly white sport that does have members of, that has athletes who aren't white on their team, to talk about this issue now with all of their athletes?
Sure. So on the first level, if it's coming down to recruiting, like getting those folks on your teams, that part has to be intentional. So you have to make it your business, so to speak, to look for and truly want to attract those type of players onto your team. But you have a lot of coaches out here who will say, wow, geez, I can't find, any players of color out there. It could be lacrosse or tennis or whatever sport you're talking about. Then you have to really ask yourself, or ask that coach, would that person want to be on your team? Like that's the next part of it, right?
You said coach, right? Do they want to be on your team? The thing that strikes me is that when you say that is coach, school principal, business leader, right? That this isn't just about athletics. It's in any of those things about attracting, people of different colors, different races to your team, not just athletic teams. As I'm listening to you, it comes to mind to me.
Definitely. It's attracting them first, right? Retaining them, just like a business, retaining them, retention. And then really, so you have that diversity now, but you have to have that inclusion. That's the biggest part. How are you, what is the interaction like? What are you valuing every member, of your team, of your company, what have you? And the second part of your question, if I remember correctly, was about how do you communicate with those folks? I think if you are a white person, you have to probably do a lot of listening right now. This is a time where, you've probably heard all kinds of quotes these days where, I can never understand, but I, stand behind all these quotes that you're hearing right now. But it's true. Like, you could never understand. I could never understand how it is to be a Chinese person or Chinese American, what have you. So I would have to do a lot of listening. So I think that's the first step in truly understanding. That's why I love to have conversations like this one, like the ones like you're having right now. And even with our team, we have a very diverse team. We have had like 14 people. We have 3 Black players or members, and Asian players, white, you name it. And we do a lot of listening. And it's the same way. I think that's the progress we have to make as a country, is to do a lot of listening first before we can start to make judgments and things like that. So to answer your question, if I was a coach, a white coach, and I had players on my team, and you were talking about these issues right now, the first step is to listen to understand, to gain knowledge. And then once you have that knowledge, you can move forward. The second part of that is educate yourself on the situation. I know a lot of schools and organizations are undergoing trainings and programs. That's pretty helpful. So if you recognize you do have a need there, you do have a big hole, a gap in your processes or your overall bias, you have to really check yourself and move in the right direction as an organization.
Yeah. Thanks so much, Coach. Coach Smith, something to add to that?
yeah, just in terms of, teaching your team and what you say to your players and such. I think Coach Green did a great job explaining it. And just listening to what has been said thus far and how it relates to a team. Coach Henson spoke about the color difference and everything. And I think it's important for my players to understand that we don't want a society in which our color is not acknowledged, right? So I saw in the chat, like, isn't there only one race, the human race? Like, that's not what we need. We need you to see us as Black people and say, wow, that's cool. Not, wow, I'm afraid of you. I feel threatened, right? That's the shift that we need in this country, because we appreciate other differences in people, and it's valued and it's honored. And that's what should happen when it comes to race as well. And that's where we as a country have a ton of work to do. So I'm fortunate enough with my team that is predominantly Black at the moment, that I have phenomenal white allies in the room. So I can operate by just opening up space. So when George Floyd was murdered and we had a team meeting coming up where I was going to talk about basketball, I wasn't in a space to do that. And I didn't think it was appropriate, right? So I would challenge everyone to think about, going back to mid-March, when, shelter in place started happening in different places and people were saying, oh, I'm working from home and such. And if you had a Zoom meeting, a phone call, or any interaction with donors, with, your corporate sponsors, whatever it may be, and you got on that Zoom or that phone call and you just started talking about business, and you didn't say, well, first I want to say, I hope your families are safe and healthy, you would sound like an idiot. And so as a coach, after George Floyd is murdered, I'm not going into a team meeting talking about how we can beat Stanford, because to me, that makes me an idiot. And so, to people who haven't taken the time to address this, what are you telling people about your priorities and how you value Black lives? So my first thing is, we're not going business as usual. We're going to talk about this thing. And I opened up the space for my players. And because of the makeup of my team, I don't have to say much. It was our sophomore guard, Kylan Crocker, who spoke up and became extremely emotional, talking about how she lives in a predominantly white neighborhood right now, and in shelter in place, when her family chooses to go for a walk, she's afraid, she doesn't know what people think of her, and how people have challenged whether or not she actually lives in that neighborhood, and things like that. And she was extremely emotional. And I'm lucky enough that, our white allies on that Zoom call said, we got you, Kai. We love you. We're here for you. We support you. They didn't say, well, isn't there only one race, the human race? Well, I'm not racist. Well, I didn't do this, right? Those are the things that need to change. And if you have those types of reactions on your team, then you need to bring in a facilitator to handle these conversations, because it's hurtful, and it's not helpful at all. And sorry, let me finish here. So
yeah, Coach, I was just going to say, I wanted to have Omri pull up the conversation that you had with your team that was on Instagram for people to watch that, for other people to watch that conversation. Please go ahead. I'm sorry.
No problem. So yeah, once we finished that Zoom conversation with the team, I then the next day had an Instagram live that I do every 2 weeks, right, on our Cal Women's Basketball Instagram. And again, I told our communication department, we're going to talk about it on this Instagram live. I talk about COVID, I'm going to talk about this. And I brought Kylan on, and she shared what she's shared with the team, and also how her teammates had been there for her, not only during this time, but even last year when my players decided they wanted to kneel for the national anthem, right, on our Black History Month game. And it was something in which the whole team was unified. The whole team came together, and we were either kneeling, you were either showing a fist, or you were holding the hands of your teammates. And this wasn't something that I put together. They came to me literally 15, 20 minutes before the game. And I was like, okay, great, right. I'm trying to worry about basketball, and we're doing this. And I said, hey, are we all on the same page? And I had every player tell me how they felt about it. And we have, a kid from Beijing, China, who was kneeling. We have, kids from all over. Some of them just held the hands of their teammates that were kneeling, just in solidarity, like, I got you. And that's what we need, really. And the only way that happens is if people are able to, like Coach Green said, listen and not be defensive, and really look in ways in which they can change, and ways in which they can make this society better.
Yeah. Coach Smith, thanks so much for sharing that.
Could I add one more thing to that there? A little bit of a flip on the question that you asked, Cap, and what Coach Smith mentioned. If you are a white coach and you maybe only have one Black person on your team, you probably should not, and I'll just say not probably, you should not make that person the spokesperson for this issue right now. You should do more, like we say, do more listening right now. And it's wonderful that Coach Smith has a ton of Black folks on her team, and also allies that took the lead. But if you only have one person of color on your team, they should not be the spokesperson for everybody right now. It should be people doing their own research in this situation. That's all I want to say.
Thanks, Coach Green. Something that continues, and we started the conversation with the first question that I gave to Coach Grant, which is, all of us, for some reason, when we think effective communication, we need to effectively communicate, we all immediately think about, what do we talk about? When in fact, communication is two parts: talking and listening. And of the two, listening is the much more mission critical skill in times of adversity. As Coach Green, as you talked about earlier, as Coach Smith was saying with the coronavirus, and when people are scared, when they're faced with adversity, crisis, being there and listening to understand. It's mission critical always. It's important always. Man, it's mission critical now. Travis, Coach Shannon, I promise you, I'm coming to you after Travis here. Coach Smith brought up her coaching Smith, and please, I don't want to get this wrong, your team's show of solidarity, whether it was kneeling, holding hands, a fist in the air, show of solidarity at your game during Black History Month. Am I getting that correct, Coach? Am I telling that story correct? Okay. Coach Smith mentioned that. It feels like the idea of kneeling for the national anthem, it's since Colin Kaepernick first did it, boy, it creates a visceral response throughout our society. Travis, I'd like to ask you, because of your unique experiences, and by the way, I know you're not like all the panelists here. I don't believe any of us can speak for an entire community, but we can speak for ourselves, certainly, and at least the people that we have relationships with, that we interact with. But Travis, with your unique experiences of where you grew up, the color of your skin, your experiences, of which the color of your skin is one of those experiences growing up in the overall American experience, but specifically then you're serving in our military. And by the way, Travis did not only serve in our military. Travis served in one of our military's most elite units. I will not say most elite. As a United States Marine Corps officer, I simply cannot say that he served in the most elite unit, but in one of, as an A-team member in U.S. Army Special Forces. Travis, when you see the flag, when you see the discourse about standing, kneeling, we shouldn't kneel, we should kneel, this person has it wrong, this person has it right. Travis, I'd first like to ask you, in the military, did you see racism? See, people ask me that question, Travis, and immediately I go, no, there's no racism in the military. And Travis, if you want to say, yeah, well, Cap, yeah, you don't see it. You don't think that because you're a white male officer. I'll hit the I believe button on it, Travis. I don't disagree with you. I just don't see it. I didn't, through my lens, as using, Coach Grant's earlier, term, I don't think there is. I didn't see it, but that doesn't mean that there wasn't. First, I'd love to ask you your opinion about race and racism in the military, and your experience with it, and then specifically as we talk about kneeling, not kneeling, all of that. What is your take on this? What would you give for guidance? What would you like to say to the viewers and listeners?
First, I would say to the issue of racism in the military, or does it exist? Is it there? I will say that I never explicitly experienced racism in the military. But I would also say that I'm sure that there are, racist people in the military. But I never experienced it explicitly. But with that, what I'll also say is, and obviously we've had this discussion many times before. One thing you notice about African Americans in special operations, so Navy SEALs, MARSOC units, Green Berets, so on and so forth, is you see very few African Americans in those job roles in the military. And for a long time, while I was serving, I didn't really have an understanding of why that was. Why are there so few African Americans, serving in special operations roles? Well, when we think about racism in an explicit way of like using derogatory terms or just very explicit, like you can't do XYZ job because you're black or whatever color. That's one thing. But when we talk about like cultural legacies of slavery in our country, so on and so forth, that's another thing. And so I think that's where you do experience sort of a systemic racism. And here's what I mean when I use the word systemic racism. Here's what I mean in the military context. So I didn't know how to swim when I came into the military. And Travis, of course, to be in special operations across the spectrum of right. So to be in special operations across the spectrum of the military, you have to know how to navigate the water. You must know how to navigate the water. And if you can't, you aren't going to succeed. Now, the difference, and this is a general statement, right? This doesn't boil down to every specific situation. There are plenty of Black people that know how to swim and swim well. But my parents didn't know how to swim. I'm sure many of the people, my grandparents, so on and so forth, also didn't know how to swim. Now, why is that? One might say that a part of that is for a long time in our country, let's say 60s, 70s, and previous to that, even in like natural bodies of water, Black people were not allowed to go and swim in those bodies of water. And so even if you move forward into the present time, where a lot of that restriction doesn't exist anymore, you don't have that sort of generational knowledge that carries over through like Black lineages of families. So for me, when I first came into the military, I had a few things. So me as at an individual level, I had a few things working against me with this problem of figuring out how to swim. One, I'm terrified of the water, right? Like I have no experience with it, and my only experiences with it have been bad. Two, I grew up an obese kid, so I never wanted to like show my body, you know, at a pool or something like that. And so being comfortable in the water was just something that was totally foreign to me. So and so I experienced that barrier in some ways because of the color of my skin, but it's not necessarily like one person who's being racist towards me. It's a legacy of our culture as a country. And so it's a barrier that just kind of exists in our system. And so, you know, if you remove water from the equation there, you know, maybe you do see a lot more Black men in special operations, but you can't remove water from that equation. It's not possible. And so, fortunately for me, and this would be, you know, a recommendation I would make, you know, to other people who are white or find themselves in a position where they have resources, have knowledge. What was good for me is that I had teammates in the military, other, you know, white guys who were going through the course with me, who had been Division I swimmers, who had been lifeguards, and who had grown up around water their whole lives, who took me by the hand and said, "Hey man, let's go get in the pool and I'm going to work with you on this." And that help and that guidance helped me get past that fear, to be able to do what I needed to do to get through the qualification course in Special Forces. And so, like I said, I didn't experience racism explicitly, but there are some kind of cultural barriers, and using the water as just a specific example, where you see kind of the legacy of racism in our country, if that makes sense, Cap.
Yeah. And so Travis, I'm glad you left out the part when you said that. I'll finish the story for Travis, because he's told me this story when he says that some of his teammates took him by the hand and took him to the pool and taught him to swim. As Travis has related to me, teaching him how to swim was the proverbial, "Travis, here's this brick. Now I'm going to push you into the deep end. Okay, swim." That was Travis's swimming lessons, and Travis is such a tough guy. He swam. Travis, can you talk about? Can you just share your thoughts about, because it just doesn't. We see it right now. This past week with Drew Brees, ESPN, the New Orleans Saints. Talk to me just about your thoughts about the flag from your unique experiences. And by the way, I'm sorry, Travis. So and by the way, I want to be very sensitive here, because I know, I appreciate. I've listened. I've read. It's not about the flag to a lot of viewers, but I would just like to hear your thoughts around that issue.
Right. So I think it first helps to start off like with what the flag means to me. I think that flag is a symbol of the ideals that we tend to hold about what our country is about culturally. And for me, that the flag represents freedom, the freedom of free expression in a society, but it also ideally represents cooperation as well. Like, we're here together, and my free expression of who I am is not only conducive to myself, but to the people around me as well. And that converse to, I do whatever I want to do selfishly, regardless of what impact it has on the people around me. And so to me, that flag represents kind of a freedom of expression of self and cooperation in this great country that we live in. And so, to the specific issue of kneeling, during when we're celebrating the colors at sports events, it is not something that I would do. It is not the way that I would protest. And I think, probably a part of that is influenced by the fact that I have been in the military, and I do know people that died over there in Afghanistan, and so it's not something that I would do, but I one, understand why athletes would do it, and two, in my mind, that's what we fight for as military members, like the idea of free expression in this country, to say, hey, there's something happening in our society that I disagree with. And in this moment where we're all kind of showing solidarity in order to elevate this issue that I think we really need to sound an alarm on, specifically police brutality, I am going to kneel. I'm going to take a knee, not to disrespect the flag, but to use, and I'm talking specifically in terms of Colin Kaepernick here. I think we criticize athletes often for the lives that they lead, the things that they do. And I think for him to take, I don't know him specifically. I don't know him as a person individually, but I think there's so much criticism for athletes not doing certain things or living in a certain way that we consider ethical or moral. And for him to know that he's risking his career, millions of dollars, to take a knee, during the celebration of our flag and our country. I think it's him using his platform as an athlete and his visibility as an athlete to draw attention to a really problematic issue in our culture in terms of police brutality against African Americans. And to me, that's why I fight for that flag. That's why I went and served, so that we have the ability to freely have that discussion in our world and in our society. And like I said, if it were me personally, given my experience as a service member, no, I wouldn't do it. But I think that's why I fight for it. And so but I also, and let me be clear here, I understand why people would have a visceral reaction to it. But I think in many ways, that was the point, was to ignite the conversation and initiate the conversation. So yeah, those are my thoughts on that.
Hey, Cap, can I add something on this?
Please, yeah, please.
I've spent no time serving in the military, and I respect, Travis's view on that. I do think it's important to point out that Colin Kaepernick got the advice to kneel during the anthem from, an ex-military person, right? From a veteran, right? A Green Beret.
From a Green Beret, I think.
Yeah, active duty Green Beret said, kneel as a sign of respect for the flag, right? You kneel for the fallen. So, you've got to understand that this was his attempt to not sit down and fold his arms and be disrespectful, but it was actually to say, hey, we have an issue. I'm going to take a knee. I'm still showing respect, but I need to bring attention to issues in this country. And the problem that I have with everyone's negative response to that knee is that there is no way or place in which it is acceptable for us to protest. We're not okay with a knee. We're not okay with peaceful protesting. Like there's just complaints all over the place. So when we try to do it peacefully and just take a knee during sporting events, there's no place for it there. Then it comes to the streets, and now you're upset. But had we listened to Kaepernick 3 years ago, perhaps George Floyd is still alive and the streets aren't burning.
Yeah, Coach Smith, thank you. It's getting back to listening to understand. I really appreciate, Travis, you're sharing those thoughts and experiences with us. And Coach Smith, you make a great point about he's not sitting there on the bench, arms folded. But look, that helps me understand better, and I appreciate it.
Hey, Cap, I got a question.
Yeah, Coach.
And again, as Coach Smith kind of alluded to, I've never served in the military, but I have great respect for those that have. And obviously, I think the point that you're bringing up in tying the decision that Colin Kaepernick made, I don't know him personally either, right? But I can relate to what his story was, and that he experienced, being put in a situation where I think he was being accused of breaking into a home when he was trying to help a friend move, and he had the police roll up on him and threaten his life, and he felt a certain way about that. And then he saw what was happening in our society with men of color losing their lives by being profiled. So at that time, he decided he wanted to take a stand against it. And he was taking a stand against police brutality and the profiling and the systemic racism. And while that was going on, there was a quote that someone put out that I thought spoke volumes. And it said, "Racism is so American that when we protest racism, the average American assumes we're protesting America." And that was deep. It cut deep. And so I would be interested to hear you guys' perspective on it, having risked your lives for our country, having known people that have lost their lives in defense of our country. And as Travis talked about, what it means to you guys, what you fought for, and what people have fought for and died for. And then, for my father or our grandparents to have served in the military and risked their lives and come back and be considered less than because of the color of their skin. Your lens is different than maybe the lens of someone at a different time in this country that served. So I look at it and say, how can you not, because of your willingness to risk your life for this country, for the freedoms that we have, be able to say, yeah, I'm with you on that, because that's why I risked my life, so we can be the greatest country on earth, and we can live up to the standards that we say as a country we want to be about. Let's get closer to that. And this is an issue. Racism is an issue. Police brutality, these things are issues, and we're never going to get to a utopia, but we can get a little bit better. And so, just like what you said, let's listen to understand, as opposed to that was offensive to say we're going to take it to the point where it's about the flag. It was never about the flag. That was a distraction. That was a distraction to take away from what it was really about, and feeding off of the fears of certain parts of our society in terms of what it was really about, and so I think we can look, in hindsight and say, as Coach Smith just talked about 3 years ago, when Cap brought this to the forefront, the price he paid for that. And then here we are now today, and we're still dealing with the same issue because we got sidetracked, we got distracted by somebody throwing something out there that it had nothing to do with. This was never about disrespecting our country, and so so I just, just the thought that it's for us, the part about the racism in America, it's like we're not protesting America. Colin Kaepernick was not protesting America. Okay, it's like, okay, this has to stop, and I think that's to the point where the listening to understand part comes into play. So I'd be interested to see what you guys' thoughts on that are.
Yeah. Travis?
And I'm gonna answer another question too in tandem with Coach Grant's question, because Mikado's asked me, since I've served in the military, have I ever been profiled, harassed, or experienced any type of racism while in plain clothes? And to give people more context from me, I grew up in Birmingham, Alabama. So the answer to that question is yes. Like, in different parts of the country growing up. I mean, I've definitely had racial slurs thrown at me, so on and so forth. Anybody who knows the history of the South, Birmingham, was a hotbed for the civil rights movement. And in terms of Coach Grant's question about, after having gone over to Afghanistan, and then coming back, and I think this answers Mikado's question as well. Living there in Tacoma, I've a few years ago when Colin Kaepernick was kneeling for the flag, just specifically, and I think this goes back to Coach Smith's comment about being on defense rather than being on offense. Just in a real simple day-to-day dealing, a neighbor of mine that lived across the street, he was going out of town for a few days. White man. Somebody that I knew very well, and he asked me would I go over and water his yard in the morning while he was gone, and he said he just kind of looked at me nonchalantly, and he wasn't thinking about it, and I don't blame him for this, but he kind of looked at me nonchalantly and said, "Yeah, man, you can just hop the fence, go back there, water the yard, and come back on over, not a problem." And I looked at him and I says, "Well, man, I tend to wear dark clothing and I tend to wear hoodies. It's not a good idea for me to hop the fence right now because somebody may misconstrue that. With the things going on with our police officers right now, I don't feel comfortable hopping your fence." And in the back of my head, I was like, man, I served this country in combat. Why do I have to worry about whether the cops are going to shoot me for going and watering my neighbor's yard after he's given me permission to do so? And so, I mean, it feels like a slap in the face, to sign up during a time of war, to know, Cap, you and I know this very well, to know that we're going to go to war. If you're signing up for special operations in the military, you know that you're going to be in harm's way in efforts to serve your country. It can definitely feel like a slap in the face. And I think the thing that Coach Grant pointed out, and the thing that Coach Smith also pointed out about Colin Kaepernick's protest, is he's not against America. What he's saying is, it's just like in that moment where I'm like, why do I have to worry about whether or not the police are going to kill me today for helping my white neighbor? What Colin Kaepernick is saying is that, hey, this is a problem. This is a problem that we've got to do something about. And the key is to try to move things forward. And like I said, I would have chosen a different way to do it, but that's primarily because of my military service, I think, in my mind. But I like the fact that he did it. I don't disagree with him doing it, because what he's doing is using his influence, at least in my interpretation, he's using his influence as a player, as a very visible public figure, to bring awareness to this. It's ridiculous. Why are Black people dying consistently in the hands of law enforcement? That's a problem. That is an issue. And to me, I don't see it as him disrespecting our country or disrespecting our flag. He's challenging us to be better as a country. And I think in my time with the program, Cap, I think what I saw about the better teams was there was some measure of internal conflict, some measure of teammates, coaches being willing to challenge each other around very difficult topics. And if we extrapolate that idea to us as a country, what Colin Kaepernick invites us to do is have a really, really difficult conversation. And what this time right now is inviting us to do is to have a really difficult conversation that brings up visceral reactions. But to me, that's the only way we move forward. We don't move forward. It's not going to be, this conversation is inherently unpleasant. And so that's a given. And so now we just need to move forward and begin having it and doing the best we can to understand and listen to one another.
Thanks, Travis. Coach Grant, so many things I think about. Travis just said something about this conversation is inherently unpleasant. Let me just share with you, me personally, as I prepared for today's conversation. The and still right now, as I'm sitting here today, the Coach Smith and I, we know each other, but we don't have a relationship. And because of that, it's uncomfortable. It's more uncomfortable for me to ask Coach Smith questions about race because I don't have a relationship with her, as I do with everybody else on here. And with everybody else on here, is it uncomfortable for me? Not as much. Not as much. And boy, that it's why, Coach Grant, quite frankly, I hate social media. Hate it. Why? Because it's not a relationship. I'm just screaming and yelling my point. I see Colin Kaepernick kneel. This gets to your question, Coach. And in that second, I have a certain visceral response based on my American experience, of which being in the military was a big part of it, that I have this visceral response. Well, if I'm on Twitter, I all of a sudden just start screaming what my visceral response is, my emotional response to seeing it. The problem with that is that then, and I hope I'm mature enough that, then I don't do that. And instead, I try to read. I have good friends like yourselves that I say, hey, what are your thoughts about this? Okay, talk to me. And by the way, I'm not saying change my opinion. I'm not saying prove me right or prove me wrong. I'm saying teach me from your experience. What do you see? And then I may not agree with you still, but at least I understand more. And if I understand more, I feel like we have a chance to get to a better place. And that's just in the Colin Kaepernick thing and the kneeling for the anthem. That's just one. I mean, I don't know if you want to call it one small thing, but that's just one thing in a much greater conversation about all the social ills that are facing our country that are keeping us from getting better. So initially, Coach Grant, I had a very visceral response to that, because when somebody kneels for the flag, when I've been raised my entire life that you stand up straight, you put your hand over your heart, you take your hat off, you put it over your heart, you don't blow bubbles, you don't talk to the next person, because you're standing for the men and women who have lost their lives serving this great country. Not perfect country, but I believe a great country. That then when I see somebody not doing it, not just Colin Kaepernick, Coach, when I see kids at a ball game and they're laughing and chewing gum and slapping each other as the flag is going on, and parents don't say anything about it, but then Colin Kaepernick takes a knee, and we have this hatred, this vitriol that goes out for Colin Kaepernick taking a knee. But when I see dads whose sons are there right next to him and they're smoking and joking, slapping each other, when we say nothing about that as a society, well, then I start to think, after having these types of conversations with you, maybe I need to shift my lens a little bit about this issue. So my take on that, Coach, has changed over the initial time that I saw it, quite frankly. What I will say, and I've written about this, by the way, and it's in writing, is as far as Colin Kaepernick is concerned himself, and I have this conversation with my son, my 8-year-old son, all the time, courage impresses me. That's what impresses me. Courage. To stand up for what you believe in. That is unpopular. That may be unpopular. To me, whether or not you agree with how Colin Kaepernick is doing this or not, I'll tell you what, courage still impresses me, and he shows courage.
So Cap, what I'm hearing is it's difficult to separate the way you were raised and the sacrifices and the commitment you made in fighting for our country and representing our country. It's really difficult to separate that when, in just in Cap's situation, he was trying to protest the very thing that over the last 2 weeks has really ignited a lot of emotion in everybody in our country. And it's been forced to the forefront. And now when people see it, whether they're black, white, no matter what their race is, they're moved to great emotion about what happened with George Floyd. Mm-hmm. That's the very reason why he took a knee however many years ago it was. It had nothing to do with your strong feelings about, hey, this is the way I see the flag.
Yeah.
Like, I guess that's the thing. I'm like, to be able to separate that, it sounds like that's very, very difficult for someone in your position that has maybe been raised with a certain ideal, or just the time that you've served in the military, the way you look at it. It sounds like it's really difficult for you to separate that from what he was really protesting.
And Coach,
I think it's difficult for all of us, but man, God, we got to get better though, right? So we all have certain biases based on how we're raised, and because of those experiences, those biases don't mean that they're set, right? If we have a growth mindset, it means, okay, I have certain biases, but let's be mature enough to get better, right?
Yeah,
let's get better.
If I
Coach,
can add
Mikado, please.
Yeah, if I can add real quick, people keep asking me, well, what was it about George Floyd's situation that caused the tipping point? And I believe, here's my personal belief, is that for 8 minutes and 46 seconds, you see a video of a man struggling to breathe, with a man in such a cavalier way, with his knee on his neck, hand in his pocket, kind of smirk on his face. And if you want to parallel that with what lynchings look like back in history, you would have someone whose hands were tied behind their back with a noose around their neck, and they died from asphyxiation. So this was just a different type of hands behind their back and asphyxiation that took place. And I think what humanized this situation for America is you see a video of it for so long. It's not just a little clip. And when you hear the phrases that are struggling to come out of his mouth, what I think really became the tipping point when he was yelling for his mother. Yeah. Because everyone has a mother. And I'm starting to think, if I'm yelling out, and if I'm not mistaken, I heard his mother has passed away. If I'm not mistaken, I may be, but I'm thinking of Donnella Henson. In my last gasping breaths, I'm not asking to be freed. I'm crying out for my mother. And I think that is what kind of causes a tipping point, is because, yes, Breonna Taylor's situation was heinous. Ahmaud Arbery, all the way back to Trayvon Martin, Rodney King, and beyond. It's horrible, right? And then, lost in all of this is Amy Cooper's situation in Central Park, right? Which that's a whole different discussion. But when he starts crying out for his mother in his last breath, I think if you have a heart that wants to sympathize, step in shoes and try to empathize, and you say, oh my gosh, I get it now. I get it. I understand why Colin Kaepernick was taking a knee. It's this. And so, but because attitude reflects leadership, the narrative got changed that he was disrespecting our country. But then you see it on TV and you go, this is it. This is why. And which has brought us to the situation right here.
And Cap, if I can add, Mikado, you're right on point. It took me a long time to even be able to watch the video, and then it took me a long time to be able to get through the whole video. But Cap, you mentioned hating social media. I'm not a fan of social media. It's annoying to me, but I'm so glad we have it, because I don't know that we'd be where we are today if we didn't have these videos going viral of these horrible murders of Black people. And then I also want to say to you, we don't really know each other, but if you or anyone is willing to listen and have the uncomfortable conversations, I'm here for it, because that's what we need. We need to make ourselves uncomfortable in order to grow. We know that from sport, right? You can't stay at the same pace on the treadmill and get any better. You have to push yourself outside of your comfort zone in order to get better. So I'm here for those uncomfortable conversations, as long as people are willing to listen.
Yeah. Thanks so much, Coach Smith. By the way, just for the panelists, Neil McGuire writes in, respectfully, please let us hear more from the panelists, meaning not from me. Neil, if my wife is upstairs right now, probably thinking, oh my God, you really don't know Eric. Most of these panelists who know me well are probably thinking, no, like my wife, this is the only time, this is the longest Eric's ever sat there actually listening. He's usually sucking the air out of every room. So, but I'll take the guidance, Neil. Coach Shannon, let me Let me further this conversation with a question for you, because of Mikado's point about police brutality. Travis have talking about it. Every person on this panel. When I hear that term, or when, as an example, Travis says, "Hey, when the police are going to shoot me if I'm hopping the fence," and Travis, I don't want to put words in your mouth. I know that's not exactly what you said, so I want to be very clear about it. But see, the response I have with my father was a Connecticut state policeman for 25 years. Served with distinction, retired honorably. Okay. And when I hear, that the police will shoot me, or that we see the police brutalizing, people of color, or it makes me uncomfortable, because I feel like my dad never did. I mean, but when we say the police, when I want to say, hey, can we say some police? A small percentage, which is bad. And I asked three different policemen to join this conversation today. Their forces, their police units didn't allow them to. They wanted to. All three of which said, "Hey, look, Cap, I can't do it." But let me highlight that I agree. Like, I can't watch that video. It upsets me as a policeman, because of that, then it does become all of us. And God, I don't want that to be the reflection on me. But Coach Shannon, when you see, or when we talk about police brutality and where you grew up, Coach, as a young man, throughout your coaching career, as a player at Miami, as a coach there, and I'm sorry, in the NFL coaching, why are those videos that we see, why is that the flashpoint, or why is so many conversations about race, it feels to me, centered around those incidences, murders that Mikado just talked about?
Well, when you think about what has happened, and each and every one of the panel members brought a good point, the word I always hear is about education. Educating your kids, educating your team is always education. And I'm looking back when I was growing up in the 80s, there was a Johnson shooting in Overtown, and there was a McDuffie shooting in Miami within the 80s. And it affected me growing up, because that's what I knew. And the one thing that brought me out of it, out of the whole situation of learning, is being educated on what's really going on in life. I go back and I look at me growing up in high school, and my son brought this up to me yesterday, as me and him was talking yesterday. He said, "Dad, you lived in Lincoln Field. You went to Ponciana Park. How did you leave Ponciana Park to make it where you was at?" And I started thinking about it. When I was at Ponciana Park, we always talk about educating and understanding each and every one of us. 50% of the teachers, when I was in elementary school, in a black neighborhood, Scott Projects was just right across the street, was all white. So my teachers, I got to know white teachers. And me and them had a conversation about it. That's the reason why I've made it and did certain things. And then I went to Miami, Norland, where 50% of my teachers were white. So you get to mingle, understand, they get to understand you. But now about maybe 7 years ago. 7 years ago, I recruited a young man. I'm not going to call a young man name out. I'm not going to say what school I was at. And I recruited this young man. And he came where I was at. And he was from all inner city school. Inner city school, no white teachers, all black coaching staff, all black. And I took him to where the school I was at. And he was struggling. He was struggling real hard. Trying to get him out of it, helping him with the class, getting to class, going to lunch, going in the weight room. And finally, I just kept trying to get him to talk to me. And finally, he made one comment. He said, "Coach, I've never been around white people before. I don't understand them." And I think that's the biggest thing we're not doing. We're not educating everybody on black, white. We're not mixing like we used to. If everybody think about this, sports, basketball, football, tennis, sports in general have no color barriers when we are playing the game. When we're playing the game, each athlete have no color barriers. It is a team. When you watch a little kid going to daycare center and another little kid going to daycare center, there's no color barriers. It is what it is. They are playing each other, no color barriers. But when you go back and you see where we're at now to this point, and I started thinking about it because my son brought this up to me. He said, "Dad, we lived in Liberty City. I went to Brownsville Junior High, and you made me go to Coral Gables Senior High." And he asked me why. I said, "Because you needed to understand what people were about besides your own color." It was diversity. Like each and every one of us, we educated our kids as we growing up. But when I look at what happened with Floyd, I never watched the video. I never ever watch videos when it comes to police brutality. I don't, because it gets me in a way that I don't want to be at. I was involved in a situation when I was a coach. Policemen stopped me and had me locked up, had me handcuffed and everything. And I was coaching at that time. And if it wasn't for the sergeant to come by and say, "What are we stopping him for?" He said, "Well, we got this description of this young man, this young man, this is young man." He said, "Fellas, that's a coach at the University of Miami. What are you guys doing?" But I was stereotyped because of I favor somebody else in that opinion. So I don't take it personal because one of my best friends is the chief of police for Coral Gables, Florida, chief of police, one of my best friends. And he's been through DA. He worked over there in what I call in the hole over there on 61st and between 15th and 12th is a bad part of Liberty City, where we should go down and sit down and talk with people because everybody knew who he was. When you sit down and you talk to him, that's who he is. But we're not getting the police officers, the little things growing up. We're not getting mingled and educating nobody anymore. I'm going to this all black school. Well, I'm going to put all the black teachers at this black school. I'm going to put all the white teachers at this school. We're not educating nobody now, and it's leaving it up to us when we get to college to try to reprogram them. And it's tough, but that's our job because we're educators. We're coaches, but we are educators. And we're going to do anything possible to educate these young men and ladies to understand what is going on in life. I'm a big time listener. I listen to everybody here, and I've learned a lot. If you tell 90% of football players in college that a Green Beret told Kaepernick to take a knee, I guarantee you they wouldn't know because it was never said. It's like the communication part, the listening part. It was all about each and everybody said was to taking a knee. But a Green Beret told him to make a difference, not the flag, but what you standing for, what happened to Black American young men today with police officers. If that would have been said over and over and over and over by each and one of us, even myself, because I don't do it enough, but give them the reason and let everybody keep saying it over. It's like anything else as an educator. It takes about 264 times for you to repeat something, for something really to sink in. And me as an educator, I let it down because I didn't say it enough. But if you would ask your team and players and people about who and why he did it, 90% wouldn't even tell you the answer. And that's why I have to do a better job, we, in my opinion, of educating each and every time that we have a chance to. Coach Smith brought up something about before meeting starts. Anything that I can do, anything that I can do that happened in the paper, newspaper, football players, basketball players, women, it don't make a difference. Anything that's life, always start my meeting off with that. Because I want them to understand this is what's going on in the world each and every day, good or bad. I bring it up. Don't put yourself in these situations. Making sure you say, here's a young man that did it the right way. But it's give us a chance to keep educating guys on what's happening in the world. White, black, or indifference, I just think that's just one of the biggest things that's disheartening to me, that I grew up in an inner city school. And this is funny. You realize I did the waltz, two-step waltz in the second grade. That is not in an inner city school, but they was teaching me another culture. I set the table in third grade at Ponciana Park Elementary, because that don't take place in inner city kids. It doesn't. And they showed you how to go right to left and everything else. Not once, not twice. We would do it about maybe twice a week, but that was just part of the education part of it. I think that we're missing, but it's also preventing a lot of things. If you think about when you learn, each and of us learn. Grant learned, Smith, you've learned, Green learned, Henson, you've learned. We all learn. And I think when we start talking about this racial stuff, it's a lot of learned behavior, because you don't know what the other person is like because you've never been around that color, or that wasn't how you was raised. And a lot of it, I think, is affecting what is happening now with the law enforcement. I mean, a lot of law enforcement now, love them all, but certain situations you don't. But is it a learned behavior because that's what you would learn when you was young, and then you just went through the system? Because it does happen. And it just affects me in a different way. And I've seen it. I've been through it in Miami. And I can't watch anything that happens with law enforcement, with somebody passed. I cannot watch it because what my experiences was during the 80s with the Johnson and McDuffie riots and everything else. It was sad. It was tough. But I just can't watch anything like that no more.
Coach Shannon, you and you were having some technical difficulties when I was introducing you, Coach, but I had said, and you've heard this from me, that every week my family and I, we talk about one good thing that's come from the quarantine, the coronavirus quarantine. And my one thing last week was Coach Shannon and I have developed a better relationship during this time. Your experiences in where you grew up is you have every reason to have a very narrow lens on race, white black relations, etc. You don't, though. I felt from the day I met you, you judged me based on the content of my character, to quote Martin Luther King, not on anything else. From the minute you met me and the rest of my teammates at the program, did you have to do something specific, Coach Shannon, to change the biases you may have had from the experiences you've had throughout your life to make yourself into the human being that you are today?
Always go back when things happen of who helped me. I can remember fourth grade teacher, Miss Schallenbacher. She was my math teacher. She helped me get through school. Junior high school, I remember Miss Day, Miss Clemens. They was white teachers. High school, the principal was Dr. Fowler. Mr. Bannerman was a science teacher. Miss Oken was a math teacher. Those people helped me get me where I am today. Now, all my coaches, Lewis Allen, my Pop Warner coach, Coach Gainer, all those guys have helped me also. But it gave me another avenue to see people in a different way that cared. Okay. One of them even told me one day, I came to school with a hole in my shirt. And Miss Schallenbacher, she told me, she pulled me aside, she said, please don't come to school with another hole in your shirt. If you don't have any shirts, I will buy one for you. That made me feel special, walking from Lincoln Field to Ponciana Park. That made me feel special that somebody of another color cared about me at that time. So always get in my mind when things go bad in the racial deal is I'm judging that individual on who they are and not what I see. I don't group everybody. And your presentation on how you approach me or how we talk or interact will give me the perception of, do I want to be around this person or not? And always surround myself with always great people. And not to try to throw Grant under the bus. He knows because he's from over town. And when we was growing up, some places we can go to and some places we could not. And if somebody that was selling drugs and we were just going through the neighborhood, they would tell us to go the other way because they wanted to see us get out the neighborhood. But in returns, when you have a white teacher or somebody in your life to help you when you're going through high school, I see a different person. But also I know there are people out there that are stereotyped that was learned behavior. Now I understand it's learned behavior of this is how I'm going to treat this color, this ethnic group all the time. And I don't put myself in those situations.
Yeah. Coach Shannon, thanks so much. Teammates, we've been on for an hour and 56 minutes. I so appreciate your time and your perspective, your thoughts, suggestions. I'd like to give all of you, and I don't want to say a closing thought on this conversation on race, because what has struck me is this should be not the conversation on race. It needs to be a conversation on race, and we need to continue to have these conversations. But I would like, at least for the closing of this Coffee with Cap, I'd like to ask you to share with us, whether it be people of white people, whether it is just for us as a country and all people. I'd like to give you the opportunity to have a final thought to share with all of us. I hate to pick people, so I'm just going to go in the view of my screen here. So, Coach Smith, could you start us off?
Yeah, I don't know that I have a final thought. I would like to suggest 2 books, and the first one, there is a story that goes along with it. Back when Michael Brown was murdered, I was protesting in Berkeley, part of a peaceful protest, and it was on our campus. And we started at one part of campus, and the plan was to march to another part of campus. And once the march started, I had to go back to, the office for some reason. And so I tail away from the march, and 2 people come along on their bikes as the march is chanting Black Lives Matter. And they start chanting all lives matter, in just like a really mocking way. And so I'm walking their direction, and I just said, hey, do you understand how hurtful that is? Like, all lives matter. No one said that prior to people saying Black Lives Matter. There was no need to say all lives matter. But when we start saying, hey, our lives matter here, it's like, no, all lives matter, right? And it's extremely hurtful. We don't, if I don't know, koalas are an endangered species, and then, let's raise money for the koalas, or let's have attention paid to the koalas. Well, what about zebras? You know, you don't do that. What about all the other animals? There's something that's happening to us right now. And so at that point, I'm extremely emotional, and I'm trying to explain to these two young kids that that's not right. You know, you shouldn't be saying that. And they just were like, oh, whatever, all lives matter. And it was extremely painful to me. I went back to my office, and I'm just hands on my desk, hands on my head on my desk, just in tears. And I couldn't stop the emotion. And the reason I was upset is because I was so disappointed in myself that I didn't have the ammunition, like the data, the knowledge to try to help them understand. And I talked to a friend of mine, and that process led me to the book, The New Jim Crow. So I'm recommending people read The New Jim Crow if you have not read this book. It speaks to the issue of mass incarceration in our country, and it'll explain to you a lot of the reasons why Black people are where we are in this society. And so from that point on, when I get into a conversation with someone, when I'm out recruiting in the gym and I'm sitting next to a coach and he says something to me or she says something to me along the lines of, well, why do Black people are killing people in their own communities. There's Black on Black crime. I say, you know what? By the time they get back to their desk and off the road recruiting, Amazon has sent them The New Jim Crow from me so that they can read this and understand and have answers to those questions. The next book I'd like to recommend, it was on the chat, but White Fragility, for anyone that is wrestling with, like, I don't understand what they're talking about with this privilege thing, and I don't understand how to be a good ally. We read White Fragility. That's another book by Robin DiAngelo, I believe, if I said that correctly. Those two books is what I want to leave this group with and recommend for everyone to take the time to read. And thank you so much, Kat, for having me. I really appreciate being a part of this conversation.
Yeah, Coach Smith, please. Yeah, I appreciate that. But yes, thank you so much for having us. Before Coach Shannon, I'm gonna come to you next, but Omri, if we have The New Jim Crow there, the link up, I don't want to move on until we also have on White Fragility. Make sure we give that link to our, there you go. Thank you. Thanks, Coach Smith. Appreciate the opportunity, by the way, Coach Smith, for you and I to develop our relationship. Coach Shannon.
The one thing that rings to my mind is if we all can, as coaches throughout every sport, love to win games. We all love to win games. And if we can have the motto, what's important now? WIN. What's important now? That's winning. What's important now is the only thing matters now. And if we can all come and have that virtual mindset of each and every day waking up and saying to yourself, what's important now? It could be your kids. It could be educating your kids. It could be educating anybody. But what's important now is a big deal that I think can help us all go a long way if we address it that way.
Coach Shannon. You're on mute, Coach. Sorry.
Cap, I want to thank you. And I've learned a lot from each and every one of the guys that's on this panel. And I take notes all the time. So, fellas, I'm going to steal some of your stuff. I'm just letting you know ahead of time because I'm learning. And I want to keep educating the guys that I'm involved with each and every day. And some things you may see me may use, but I'm telling you ahead of time, I'm always a learner and always want to educate the young men. And I want to thank each and every one of you guys for giving me an opportunity to spend time with you today, this Saturday, and really enjoyed it.
Thank you so much, Coach Shannon. Travis, final thought.
I think to kind of piggyback on what Coach Shannon was saying, I think all of us would benefit from recognizing, trying to recognize the humanity in the people that we're dealing with, and recognizing that whatever actions that we see in another person aren't simply that moment, but they're the culmination of their life experiences and the lenses they have, the places they grew up in, the culture they experience. Because it doesn't absolve any negative action of any person to have a better understanding of their background, but it certainly allows a better conversation to ensue from poor actions. I mean, understanding, having white people understand the minority experience and minorities understanding the white experience, and this like both of those help the conversation. I think just purely if it's just one-sided, I think it limits, puts up barriers where maybe there don't necessarily have to be barriers. And again, I think I want to say that there has to be an inherent understanding that the conversation is going to be tough. There is going to be visceral reactions. There is going to be offense taken, but being able to sit in that discomfort, I think, is key to advancing that conversation.
Travis, appreciate your time this morning. Appreciate your thoughts and perspective. I said earlier, I cannot suggest enough to the listeners.
Thank you for having me, Cap.
Yeah. Again, appreciate it, Travis. Happy to do so. As I started earlier, please go to TEDx and check out Travis's speech, Adapt and Overcome. Please go check it out. I've made, my wife's watched it, my son has watched it, because that 10 minutes alone made me a better person. You have to check it out. If we could, Omri, pull that up again quickly for our listeners. Yeah, please go and do it. Travis, I'm proud of you. Proud that you're my teammate. You make me better. It reflects well on me that you are my teammate. Mikado, final thought.
Well, Coach, if anybody can see over my shoulder, I have some boxing gloves drawn on the dry erase board. One of my student athletes did that. And that is always a constant. Well, boxing is my favorite sport and a real love of mine. I do ring announcing on the side. So, but it was also an encouragement to me to stay in the fight, for what's right. And sometimes that fight, man, you're taking shots and you're weathering the storm against the ropes and you're doing the shoulder roll, trying to get out of the way of things, but you got to endure. And so for going into my 21st season, working with student athletes, primarily football teams, my 7th season at A&M coming up, my life mission really hasn't changed. And it comes from the scriptures when some of the pious religious leaders approached Jesus trying to put him in a trap of what is the greatest commandment of all. And he responds, for the reference, Matthew chapter 22, starting in verse 34, he says, love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your mind, and with all your soul. But he doesn't end there. And he says, but the second is just as great as the first. Love your neighbor as yourself. And so my life mission has and will continue to be as best I can to honor God in every conversation, in these conversations, as I'm fighting, hopefully, the good fight. But it is always going to be for me to hopefully bridge the gap between God and man, right? That's number one, but also bridging the gap between man and man, right? And if we look at that visually, that forms a cross, and we all have a cross to carry, but where crosses are tethered together, that's where love intersects. And so it is my passion. It is my full conviction. No one can convince me otherwise of being me. And so this is squeezing me right now, and I'm wanting this to come out, because what's in you will always come out. And so it is my desire to reconcile men with a loving God, but also men with each other. When I say men, I mean the human race, because to any of the females out there, that wasn't my intention, but with humans is bringing them together, reconciling those things that have been fragmented and broken. And so here I am. I don't know how much time I have left, but the hourglass kind of tells me that I'm on borrowed time. And so at some point, I'm going to be 45 here next week. And according to the law of averages, I'm in the third quarter of living. But God knows. And so I don't have time to waste. And so that is my life mission. And that's what I will continue, hopefully, to bring to these conversations, is always with an undercurrent of love and pointing people back to the amazing God who created them and loves them. And that's my job. And I want to be able to, if I have to crawl, limp, drag myself through the finish line, then that's how I want to go. So thank you, Cap.
Yeah, again, thank you, Mikado. And as I said when I introduced you, if you meet somebody who says, Eric Kapitulik, I don't know about that guy. I can see it. I understand. The last 45 seconds of you talking is the reason why I said if you ever hear somebody say that about Mikado Hinson, that's a bad person who's saying that about Mikado Hinson.
Love you, Cap.
Love you too, buddy. Coach Grant, final thought.
Yeah. So for me, Cap, it's been a pleasure to be able to be a part of this, and I thank you for putting this on, and hopefully for your listeners, they were able to get something as I did from everybody you had on, and I appreciate everybody sharing. I guess my final thought would be, for all of us, we were all because we're in various stages of a stay-at-home order, and we get a chance to sit and either watch or hear or read about some of the current events as it relates to race relations and police brutality and some other topics that have come up. I guess for me, the final thought would be for your listeners. I'm not one that's big on speeches and talk. To me, it's more about action. So my final thought would be for those that are moved by what you see, to do something, to make a difference. Right? For us that are coaching young athletes, we get a chance to influence and impact lives every day with what we do. So I would challenge your listeners and everybody to be convicted to do something to make a difference in the lives of the young people that we get a chance to impact. I think it was Coach Smith that said earlier, or maybe I think it was Coach Green that said earlier, that she's encouraged by what we see, young people, their involvement, and the way that they are interacting on social media or getting out and using their voice to say, this is how I feel, whether it's, black, white, no matter what, coming together to make a difference. So I think that next generation is going to make a difference. So if you go back in history and you look at slavery was abolished in 1865, I believe, and 100 years later, we're dealing with the civil rights movement, where we're still trying to get equal rights and a right to vote. And here we are in 2020, and in 45 years, we'll be 200 years removed from slavery. And so my kids will be at a point where they're saying, are we still dealing with the same stuff that we were dealing with in 1965? Are we still dealing with the same stuff? Or are we at this point going to be in a position where we can influence the next generation to where my grandchildren, I doubt I'll be around, but are they going to be in a different world than what we had a chance to participate in? Or we could just go back to business as usual, okay, and have some conversations about it, and then go back to our own world. My challenge to all of us and to your listeners is, please don't let that happen, because your children and your children's children deserve to be in a better world. And we've made some improvements, but we still have a long way to go. And Cap, I think you said it, doesn't stay the same, right? We have to continue to get better. with everything. So hopefully this conversation sparks the coaches listening, the business leaders listening, the people that are involved in educating the next generation of youth listening to do something in your whatever it is that you can do. Try to make a difference to make it better. So those are my final thoughts.
Coach Grant, thank you so much. I appreciate your friendship. Please tell Christina I said hello. And again, I hope you have a great weekend, Coach. If there's something we can do it myself or that the program, please let me know. But every time we talk, Coach, every time I spend time with you, I leave better. That's the way I feel this morning about our time that we spent together. And I certainly hope our listeners and viewers feel the same. They should.
I appreciate you, man. Love you.
Appreciate you, Coach. Coach Green.
Again, Cap, thanks for having me. Thanks for having us. This conversation has been great. I've learned a lot. Still am learning. I heard it was funny, I guess you can say, but not funny in other ways. A funny quote the other day, and it said, "Time zones are really funny. It could be June 6th in America, June 7th in Australia. I'm sorry, take it back. June 6th in California. It could be June 7th in Australia, but yet it's still 1927 in America." Like, so it's like a weird way to think about what was going on in our country and how far we've really come, like Coach Grant said. And I think the main thing right now is to keep our foot on the gas, like we've been saying already. Not to beat a dead horse, but we have a long way to go. And again, when the cameras stop rolling, I hope we can still continue to fight for what we believe in, the America we all want to live in. And whether that's doing the research need to do or whatever. And I tell some of our kids on our team, it's almost like buying a stock or investing in a company. Would you just watch one TV show to get all your information about this one thing, or would you read a book or read the newspaper and try to maybe call up folks and try to find as much as you can about that topic or about that company, about that stock before you made a move or developed a quick opinion, or maybe you experience that company's products yourself. But I'm encouraged by this movement from our young folks, and we all got to get behind them. And I'm excited. I really am. Thank you.
Yeah, Coach Green. Thank you so much. There's, despite some of the comments, I hope I've listened to more than I've talked during this conversation. I certainly have wanted to do so. I have and would like to share one thought with all of our viewers and listeners. I started this morning's conversation noting that adversity creates an opportunity. Utopia may not be that opportunity, but our getting to a better place certainly is. Let's work toward doing so. Our children deserve it. So too does every American. Black lives do matter. They do. So too blue, Asian, white, Native American, Indian, and Hispanic. So too lesbian, gay, straight, bi, and transsexual. American lives matter. And for what it's worth, I've never heard anyone in the Black Lives Matter community say they don't. And if someone has, then they're ignorant. And although ignorance should be a crime, at the very least, it definitely doesn't have anything to do with race. Ignorance is systemic. America matters. I believe America is the greatest country on earth, but if recent weeks have taught us nothing else, I hope it has taught us, all of us, that we need to get better. Maybe we start working toward it by having a conversation over coffee, your own conversation over coffee, with someone who did not share the same American experience as your own. Ask questions and then listen to understand. I know that I am better for doing so this morning. And if I am better, then so too maybe my family. And then the schools, athletic teams, and companies that we attend, play for, lead, or work at. And I truly hope, ultimately, the country we live in. Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That's America. And every American deserves the opportunity for it. Every American. Again, I can't thank our panelists enough for joining us this morning. I'd like to thank the viewers and the listeners. Thank you again and have a great day.